but it didn't happen because I threw him over the table.
Okay, was that in retaliation for what he did?
Yeah.
Okay. And had he fell a little bit over, he would have been dead?
Yeah.
Okay. Were you trying to kill him?
Yeah.
You just heard a wrestler admit to attempted murder on camera, and that's not even the wildest thing you'll see today. From shattered skulls and torn muscles to crowds so hostile they took over entire WrestleMania main events, these are the matches that went horribly wrong. Brace yourself, because some of these disasters will leave you speechless. New Jack vs. Vic Grimes stands out as one of the most terrifying moments in wrestling history, with sheer brutality that still shocks fans. At ECW Living Dangerously 2000, this scaffold match was meant to be the ultimate showcase of ECW's hardcore style, a high-stakes spectacle designed to keep fans on the edge of their seats. But what happened was far darker than anyone expected. New Jack held real-life animosity toward Grimes, stemming from an earlier incident where Grimes allegedly gave him a concussion, and this personal grudge nearly turned the match into a deadly encounter. The two men climbed a 20-foot scaffold with stacked tables below, planning to crash through them together, but Grimes hesitated. Whether from fear or self-preservation, that split second changed everything, and New Jack, driven by rage and a desire for revenge, grabbed Grimes and threw him off the scaffold alone, without any coordination.
But it didn't happen because I threw him over the table.
Okay, was that in retaliation for what he did?
Yeah.
Okay. And had he fell a little bit over, he would have been dead?
Yeah.
Okay. Were you trying to kill him?
Yeah.
The aftermath was horrific, as Grimes missed the tables entirely and landed awkwardly on New Jack's head, causing New Jack's skull to crack on the concrete arena floor. New Jack suffered severe brain trauma, bleeding on the brain, permanent vision loss in his right eye, and lasting nerve damage that affected his behavior for years. He needed 23 stitches and immediate hospitalization, while Grimes walked away with relatively minor injuries. The match ended in complete medical chaos, and a heated debate erupted over whether New Jack had intentionally tried to harm Grimes. This incident was later featured in New Jack's Dark Side of the Ring episode, where he showed no remorse. Their feud continued, reigniting in XPW 2 years later with another scaffold spot involving a taser, cementing their rivalry as one of wrestling's most dangerous. Speaking of legendary matches that pushed the limits of the human body, our next catastrophic encounter takes us to perhaps the most famous cell match in wrestling history: Mankind vs. The Undertaker. The Hell in a Cell match at King of the Ring 1998, featuring Mick Foley as Mankind against The Undertaker, is celebrated as one of the greatest matches ever, but it also stands as one of the most catastrophic spectacles ever witnessed. Built as a brutal enclosed match, it began with Mankind perched atop the 16-foot structure, taunting The Undertaker and setting the stage for one of the most talked-about moments in sports entertainment. No one could have predicted the sheer carnage about to unfold. The disaster started almost immediately when The Undertaker threw Foley off the cell roof, sending him crashing through the Spanish announce table below, a planned spot that still went horribly wrong. The impact dislocated Foley's jaw, bruised his kidneys, and caused internal bleeding. Any reasonable person would have stayed down after such trauma, but Mick Foley was no ordinary performer, driven by sheer determination and, as he later admitted, his own ego, and he climbed back to the top of that cell structure.
And this is when I talked about that ego coming into play. You know, I said it like in this, I don't know what it was. There was like something larger than the two of us out there. The truth is, it was my ego taking offense to anyone, even The Undertaker, telling me when it was time to go home.
What happened next was completely unplanned and terrifying, as The Undertaker executed a chokeslam on Mankind, but the cell's roof panel gave way unexpectedly, sending Foley crashing to the mat below along with a steel chair that knocked out a tooth, which lodged in his nose and caused a severe concussion. Despite being stretchered out, Foley returned, enduring thumbtacks and more punishment before finally losing. He required hospitalization and suffered long-term back and neck issues, later revealing in his autobiography, "Have a Nice Day," that these falls significantly shortened his career. Controversy followed over WWE's safety lapses, The Undertaker wrestling with a broken foot, and debates over whether such extreme risks glorified violence, ultimately influencing the company's shift to the PG era. Speaking of McMahon family members putting their bodies on the line recklessly, our next disaster involves the boss's son taking a fall no one should ever attempt: Shane McMahon vs. Steve Blackman. Shane McMahon built a reputation on risking life and limb for wrestling fans, but his hardcore championship defense against martial artist Steve Blackman at SummerSlam 2000 took those death-defying tendencies to an insane level. This no-holds-barred brawl, with Shane as the non-wrestler son of WWE's boss defending his championship, turned what should have been a straightforward hardcore match into one of the most terrifying moments in SummerSlam history. The disaster peaked when Shane climbed the 40-foot Titantron scaffolding to escape his opponent, with the relentless Blackman pursuing him at every step. Blackman struck Shane repeatedly with a kendo stick, raining blow after blow on the boss's son as both men clung high above the arena floor. What happened next was absolutely sickening. Shane plummeted backward from that incredible height onto a crash pad below, but the fall was so high and awkward that the minimal padding barely absorbed the impact. He suffered a concussion, severe back trauma, and internal bruising, and Blackman later recalled how Shane insisted on taking the spot despite the obvious risks, with the crash pad providing almost no protection, producing a sickening thud audible on television. Shane continued briefly but was visibly dazed, and Blackman won with an elbow drop from the structure, though the victory was overshadowed by concern for Shane's well-being. His hospitalization highlighted his daredevil persona but also sparked controversy over nepotism. Critics argued that Shane risked his life for his father, while trained wrestlers avoided such extreme stunts, and the drama only increased when Blackman suffered a migraine after a botched kick. Speaking of massive falls from tremendous heights, our next disaster features another cell match where a 400-pound man took a plunge that would haunt him for years. Rikishi in the six-man Hell in a Cell. The six-man match at Armageddon 2000 was a chaotic free-for-all, cramming 6 of WWE's biggest stars, Kurt Angle, The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H, The Undertaker, and Rikishi, into one demonic structure for a WWE Championship match. With so many legends in one cell, something was bound to go wrong, and the disaster centered on the massive Samoan superstar Rikishi. What was meant to be a highlight reel moment became a cautionary tale about the brutal toll professional wrestling can take on the human body. The defining spot came when The Undertaker choke-slammed the 400-pounder Rikishi off the cell roof into a truck bed filled with sawdust and hay. The fall was planned as a spectacular moment fans would talk about for years, and they certainly did, but not for the reasons WWE intended. The fall was slightly botched, with Rikishi landing off-center and compressing his spine on impact. The damage was severe, causing Rikishi intense back pain that haunted him for years, and he later admitted the impact felt like death, with his wife furious over the risk he took for a paycheck and their family nearly fracturing because of it. The match halted as medics rushed to check on him, and controversies followed, including last-minute changes, Rikishi regretting not adjusting the truck's position, and debates about WWE pressuring larger performers into dangerous spots. These injuries contributed to Rikishi's early retirement, and although Kurt Angle retained amid the chaos, the fall overshadowed the match. Speaking of impromptu matches that went catastrophically wrong, our next disaster involves a torn quadriceps, a host named Snoop Dogg, and the biggest wrestling event of the year, The Miz vs. Shane McMahon. WrestleMania is supposed to be the showcase of the immortals, where dreams come true and legends are made, but even the grandest event can produce moments of absolute embarrassment. The impromptu match between The Miz and Shane McMahon at WrestleMania 39 was precisely that. When host Snoop Dogg announced the surprise bout, the crowd was excited to see Shane back in a WWE ring, but nobody expected the entire segment to collapse within seconds. Disaster struck just 15 seconds in, when Shane attempted a simple leapfrog, only to completely tear his quadriceps muscle upon landing, leaving him immobile and writhing in visible pain on the canvas. What was meant to be a fun, celebrity-adjacent segment instantly became an exercise in damage control and improvisation.
I was telling the referee, I was like, hey, play someone's music. I don't care whose music it is. Hit the finisher. Have Snoop Dogg hit me with a Snoop Dogg elbow. And so I get all of a sudden I turn around and Snoop Dogg sucker punches me.
Snoop Dogg improvised brilliantly, punching The Miz twice and then pinning him with a people's elbow to salvage something from the segment, but the damage was done. Shane McMahon required surgery and months of recovery, eerily echoing a similar injury his father, Vince McMahon, had suffered years earlier. The catastrophe exposed WWE's reliance on aging part-timers who may not be in peak physical condition, and controversies arose over Shane's conditioning and whether the spot was rushed without proper preparation. Wrestling analyst Stevie Richards later examined the leapfrog mechanics and suggested it was a preventable error with proper warm-up and technique. The Miz later praised everyone's adaptability in salvaging the segment, but fans rightfully labeled it one of the most embarrassing moments in WrestleMania history. Speaking of WrestleMania matches that left crowds absolutely furious, our next disaster involves two departing superstars and a hostile New York audience: Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar. On paper, This match at WrestleMania Dix should have been a dream encounter, with two of wrestling's most physically imposing competitors and Stone Cold Steve Austin as special guest referee. The promotional hype was enormous, but what unfolded became one of the most disastrous and hostile matches ever broadcast, not due to physical injuries or botched spots, but because of something far worse: backstage politics leaking to the public. News had surfaced that both Goldberg and Lesnar were leaving WWE after the event, and the notoriously passionate New York crowd was furious, perceiving the two as sellouts collecting their paychecks before walking out the door. From the opening bell, the crowd booed relentlessly, chanting, "You sold out, nah nah nah, hey, goodbye," and even cheering for Hulk Hogan, who wasn't even in the building. The hostility was palpable, creating an atmosphere no wrestling match could overcome. The wrestlers themselves seemed to feed into the negativity, stalling with rest holds and delivering minimal action, which only made the crowd angrier. Lesnar even flipped off the fans in frustration, and the only cheers of the entire match came for Steve Austin's post-match stunners on both competitors. Goldberg won with a spear and jackhammer, but absolutely nobody cared about the result. The catastrophe damaged both careers significantly, though Lesnar eventually pivoted successfully to UFC, while Goldberg's reputation took a serious hit. Backstage, Vince McMahon was reportedly furious, and commentator JBL later noted that the toxic atmosphere represented one of the lowest points he had ever witnessed in professional wrestling. This match marked the end of both competitors' WWE runs for years. Speaking of WrestleMania main events that left crowds completely hostile and uninterested, our next disaster involves a coronation nobody wanted: Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns. If any match symbolized everything wrong with WWE's booking under Vince McMahon, it was the Universal Championship main event between Lesnar and Reigns at WrestleMania 34. This match was meant to be Roman Reigns' triumphant coronation, the moment he would claim the top championship and cement himself as WWE's undisputed face. But instead it devolved into a repetitive slog that had the New Orleans crowd doing everything except watching. The match consisted mostly of an endless barrage of suplexes and finishers that went nowhere, while fans who had long rejected Reigns' push hijacked the event with chants of "This is awful," "Beach Ball Mania," CM Punk, and Rusev Day. The crowd was literally playing with beach balls instead of engaging with what was supposed to be the climax of the biggest wrestling event of the year, and the disconnect between WWE's intentions and the audience's reaction could not have been more stark or embarrassing. Lesnar retained unexpectedly after 6 F5s, with Reigns bleeding profusely from a botched spot, leaving the crowd stunned and confused. The catastrophe symbolized WWE's complete failure to read its own audience, alienating fans and stalling Reigns' momentum further. Controversy surrounded a possible botched finish, with rumors of a referee miscue, and Lesnar's part-time status only fueled fan frustration, while Reigns' prior matches, where sleeping chants had become common, amplified the backlash against his coronation storyline. Speaking of commentator feuds that probably should have stayed in the booth, our next disaster features an announcer who simply could not wrestle. Michael Cole versus Jerry Lawler. Sometimes WWE makes decisions that leave fans scratching their heads in bewilderment, and booking a 14-minute WrestleMania match between two commentators was definitely one of those decisions. The feud between Michael Cole and Jerry the King Lawler had been building for months, with Cole's obnoxious heel antics generating genuine heat. A quick squash match where Lawler destroyed Cole would have been the perfect payoff. Instead, WWE gave us 14 agonizing minutes of rest holds and interference that killed the WrestleMania crowd. The match saw Cole dominate the aging Lawler with rest holds and interference from Jack Swagger, dragging at a pace that would have been slow for a mid-card match, let alone a WrestleMania bout. The crowd died as the interminable action dragged on and on, with fans actively checking out what should have been a feel-good moment for the beloved Lawler. The match ended in a disqualification victory for Cole via ankle lock, only for the anonymous Raw general manager to reverse the decision, awarding Lawler the victory, but prolonging an angle that absolutely nobody wanted to see continue. With a cage match rating of 0.9, this match holds the dubious distinction of being WrestleMania's lowest-rated match in the history of that database. The catastrophe robbed Lawler of a feel-good WrestleMania moment that he absolutely deserved after decades of service to the company, and it wasted the involvement of Stone Cold Steve Austin as the special enforcer. Controversy focused on the feud's excessive length, though Cole's microphone work was praised as excellent heel performance, while the match itself exposed his complete in-ring inexperience. Backstage, critics reportedly called it the worst feud in WWE history, with Lawler genuinely frustrated over Cole's disrespectful behavior during the program. Speaking of matches that featured supernatural elements and completely fell flat, our next disaster involves maggots, worms, and one of the worst WrestleMania bouts of all time: Randy Orton vs. Bray Wyatt. The feud heading into WrestleMania 33 had been compelling, featuring supernatural storytelling that included Orton burning down Wyatt's compound in one of the most memorable Raw segments in years. The build-up positioned Wyatt as a legitimate threat and suggested their WWE Championship match would be truly special, but fans got instead a match relying on gimmicky projections that looked terrible and buried one of WWE's most promising characters yet again. The match featured projections of maggots, worms, and cockroaches on the mat, an idea that may have sounded intriguing in a creative meeting but failed spectacularly in execution. The visuals looked cheesy and cheap, more likely to elicit laughter than fear or awe, and rather than enhancing the supernatural storytelling, they distracted viewers and pulled them entirely out of the match. The bout itself was shockingly short, lasting only 10 minutes, and lacked any real heat or drama despite months of build-up. Wyatt dominated briefly before Orton hit an abrupt RKO to win the championship, ending the match in thoroughly anticlimactic fashion. It was rated 1.2 on Cage Match and was voted the worst match of 2017 by multiple wrestling publications. This catastrophe effectively killed whatever momentum Bray Wyatt had built, continuing his frustrating pattern of losing whenever it mattered most. Controversies included Orton later mocking the bug projections in interviews and debates over WWE's failure to capitalize on a feud with genuine potential, highlighting Wyatt's sad pattern of being built up only to be torn down at the worst possible moment. Speaking of long-awaited matches that completely failed to deliver, our next disaster involves an 18-month build-up and a botched finish that helped kill an entire wrestling promotion: Hulk Hogan vs. Sting. Starrcade 1997 was supposed to be WCW's crowning achievement, the culmination of 18 months of incredible storytelling that transformed Sting into a silent vigilante seeking vengeance against the NWO and Hollywood Hulk Hogan. The build-up was perfect, with Sting descending from the rafters, iconic crow imagery, and the anticipation of finally seeing Hogan get what he deserved. This was meant to cement WCW's dominance over WWE in the Monday Night Wars. Instead, it became the beginning of the end, with the disaster centered on a completely botched finish. The plan was for Hogan to win via a fast count pin from referee Nick Patrick, exposing corruption within WCW and setting up Bret Hart to restart the match. But Patrick counted at a completely normal speed, confusing everyone in the arena and at home on pay-per-view. The storyline made no sense, as the fast count looked like any other 3 count in wrestling history. Bret Hart came out anyway and restarted the match, leading to Sting's submission victory, but the sloppy execution combined with Sting's rusty performance after a year off made the spectacle feel like a letdown. Fans who had waited 18 months for this moment felt robbed of the satisfying payoff they deserved. The catastrophe accelerated WCW's decline, with controversies blaming Hulk Hogan's notorious backstage politics for the botch, as many insiders claimed Hogan deliberately sabotaged the finish to protect his image. Though Eric Bischoff has consistently denied this, the drama included Sting's post-match demotion and marked the beginning of WCW's long slide into irrelevance. Speaking of personal feuds that failed to deliver in the main event, our next disaster features rest holds, slow pacing, and a completely exhausted crowd: Triple H vs. Randy Orton. The feud heading into WrestleMania 25 was intensely personal, ignited by Orton's vicious attacks on the McMahon family, including Triple H's wife Stephanie and father-in-law Vince. The storyline had genuine heat, portraying Orton as a psychotic predator who had crossed every line, and fans were primed for a brutal WWE Championship match where Triple H would exact violent revenge. Instead, they got 23 minutes of rest holds and slow pacing that completely killed the excitement that had been built. The match was hamstrung by a stipulation that Triple H would lose the title on a countout or disqualification, which severely limited the high-impact moves fans expected from a grudge match of this magnitude. Instead of the violent confrontation the storyline demanded, the competitors delivered a methodical, technical match more suited to a completely different feud. The pacing was agonizingly slow, with extended rest-hold sequences that drained whatever energy remained in the building, making matters worse. Positioned after the legendary Shawn Michaels vs. Undertaker encounter, widely considered one of the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time, the exhausted crowd booed the finish when Triple H won with a pedigree. The catastrophe wasted a genuinely hot build-up, with controversies swirling over the stipulation killing the match's momentum and speculation about Triple H's influence on booking decisions. The drama extended the feud unnecessarily, with rematches that failed to recapture the magic the storyline once had. Speaking of physical mismatches that produced unwatchable results, our next disaster features 2 giants who simply couldn't work together: Giant Gonzalez vs. The Undertaker. WrestleMania 9 is often remembered as one of the worst WrestleMania events in history, and the match between Giant Gonzalez and The Undertaker is a major reason why. The concept seemed straightforward. Pit the legendary Undertaker against the 7'7" Giant Gonzalez for a clash of monsters. But what looked interesting on paper became an absolute train wreck, producing one of the ugliest matches in WrestleMania history and proving that size alone cannot compensate for a complete lack of wrestling ability. The match was sluggish from the opening bell, with Gonzalez's limited mobility leading to awkward chops and absolutely zero chemistry between the two performers. Gonzalez could barely move, let alone execute the kind of offense necessary to make a compelling wrestling match. The Undertaker, one of the greatest workers in wrestling history, found himself carrying an opponent who simply could not hold up his end of the bargain.
And he would pull me down. He'd grab me by the back of my head. He'd pull me down, and I'm expecting the shot across the shoulder blades. He'd hit me in the back of the neck.
The match ended in a disqualification when Gonzalez resorted to using chloroform on The Undertaker, a finish as bizarre as it was unsatisfying. Rated 0.77 on Cage Match, it remains one of WrestleMania's ugliest bouts ever. The catastrophe highlighted 1993's poor booking decisions, with controversies over Gonzalez's inexperience and his ridiculous airbrushed bodysuit gimmick meant to make him look more muscular. This match was part of The Undertaker's monster phase at WrestleMania, where he faced oversized opponents who couldn't deliver compelling matches, and the drama included Gonzalez's quick exit from WWE as the company realized he wasn't going to work as a long-term attraction. Speaking of WrestleMania main events completely overshadowed by other storylines, our next disaster involves a championship match nobody cared about: John Cena versus The Miz. The main event of WrestleMania 27 was supposed to be The Miz's crowning achievement, the moment where the former reality TV star proved he belonged on the biggest stage of the year. His WWE Championship defense against John Cena should have been the culmination of everything he had worked for, but instead, the match was entirely overshadowed by The Rock's hosting duties and interference, turning The Miz into an afterthought in his own championship match. The match itself was solid but unremarkable, and the focus was never truly on the competitors in the ring, as everything revolved around The Rock, who had returned to WWE after years away and commanded all the attention. The finish involved a double countout that required a restart, but things worsened when The Miz suffered a legitimate concussion from a barricade spot during the match. He appeared visibly dazed for the remainder of the bout, clearly not operating at full capacity. The Rock interfered, hitting The Miz with a rock bottom, which allowed Cena to secure the victory. The Miz later revealed he lost memories of the match entirely and regretted not stopping it when he realized something was wrong. The catastrophe made The Miz's championship reign feel like a complete afterthought, with controversy centering on The Rock essentially burying the current champion and WWE's handling of The Miz's concussion. The drama highlighted The Miz's overlooked achievement, as he had worked incredibly hard to reach the WrestleMania main event only to have his moment stolen by a returning legend. Speaking of women's matches that exposed the division struggles, our next disaster features two performers who simply weren't ready for WrestleMania: Sable versus Tori. The women's championship match between Sable and Tori at WrestleMania 15 was meant to help revive a women's division that had been neglected for years, but instead it became a 5-minute train wreck exposing everything wrong with how WWE treated its female performers during the Attitude Era. While other women on the roster were capable workers, Sable and Tori were pushed based on looks rather than in-ring ability, and WrestleMania 15 made that painfully clear. The match was botch-heavy, with Sable reportedly refusing to take bumps and Tori missing moves throughout the brief bout. The chemistry between the two performers was non-existent, and the crowd quickly lost interest as nothing connected or flowed, making the 5-minute match feel like an eternity. The finish saw Sable win with a powerbomb that required assistance from Nicole Bass, adding another layer of awkwardness to an already dismal affair. Rated 0.63 on Cage Match, the match exposed the division's neglect and WWE's priorities during this era, with controversies over Sable's ego and backstage issues that eventually led to her departure. The drama included Tori's subsequent stalker storyline and highlighted the ongoing struggle for women's wrestling to be taken seriously in WWE for years to come. Speaking of matches that failed to engage the audience despite theoretically likable performers, our next disaster takes us back to the cartoonish era of late 1980s wrestling. The Bushwhackers versus the Fabulous Rougeaus. WrestleMania 5 is fondly remembered for the mega main event between Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, but the undercard featured some absolute stinkers, with the tag team match between the Bushwhackers and the Fabulous Rougeaus standing out as the most egregious example of filler content that had no business on the grandest stage of them all. What was supposed to be a fun, crowd-pleasing encounter instead became a 5-minute exercise in audience apathy, epitomizing everything wrong with the cartoonish era of 1980s wrestling. The match was a goofy affair featuring the Bushwhackers' signature arm-licking antics and minimal actual wrestling, while the crowd sat in dead silence as the competitors went through their routines with nobody in the arena seeming to care. The fabulous Rougeaus, who were actually talented workers, were reduced to being foils for comedy spots that simply didn't land. The Bushwhackers won with their battering ram finisher after stealing Jimmy Hart's jacket in a spot meant to be comedic but fell completely flat. Rated 1.15 on Cage Match, the match epitomized the worst aspects of 1980s wrestling's cartoonish presentation. The catastrophe was simply a lack of engagement, with no major controversies or dramatic backstage stories, just a match that had no business being at WrestleMania. A cheeky groin spot raised some eyebrows among the family audience, but otherwise, this match has been largely forgotten, and rightfully so.